We've
Okay.
been doing this for 2 years.
I know.
Virginia Baxter.
Aye.
Jeff Kellogg.
Aye.
Doug Otto.
Aye.
And Sunny Zia.
Aye.
You know how much longer our meetings have gone into years.
That's okay.
All right, moving on. We're going to 4.1, which is the district initial bargaining proposal to the CHI union, the part-time faculty union, and 4.2, the CHI initial bargaining proposal to the district for full contract renewal. The law requires that these initial bargaining positions be presented from the district to the union and from the union to the district. This isn't the end of it. This is the beginning. The openers, that's what they're called, the items that are up for consideration are set forth in these. This is an informational item tonight, and this will come back at the next board meeting for action. Excuse me, in some ways, and so if you get your copy of the agenda, you can see what the reopeners are. There are 8 from the district to the union, and there are 11 from the union back to the district, and so we don't need to, well, if anybody wants to discuss this, they're posted above, but if anybody wants to discuss this, we can. But all it is that this is required by law that we set these out like this. Any questions or comments? Seeing none, we'll move on to 5.1, implementation of the Associated Student Body $2 student representation fee. The students voted to assess themselves $2. $1 goes to Long Beach City College, 1 goes to the state. They're used for advocacy purposes. This is an action item. It's recommended that the board approve the implementation of the $2 student representation fee and designate authority to the Dean of Student Affairs to approve disbursements in alignment with Education Code Section 76063.
So moved.
Moved by Trustee Archuleta,
Second.
second by Trustee Zia. And any discussion? Yes, sir.
Great,
Student
thanks.
Trustee.
So great. I want to give some feedback for those of you who aren't really aware what this $2 representation fee really is. This was made possible through AB 1358 by Assemblymember Fong. Basically allows student governments to take advantage of an opportunity to vote with the students for a $2 representation fee. So $1 would go towards advocacy efforts within our local college. So it definitely empowers students by having the ability to meet with local legislators, go up to trips to Sacramento and meet with legislators. Because that's something that we really need to do. We need to advocate for our students, and that's something that I feel we've been lacking as not so much as a student organization, but we feel we should be empowered to have that. And the other $1, as Otto mentioned, would go to the state for advocacy efforts, but I want to specify that. It wouldn't just go to the general state. It would go to a statewide organization that's basically run by students, and that's an organization that I'm a part of, and I'm very opinionated about it, and I'm really excited that it has come to the board. I'm fully supportive of it, and yeah, it's really exciting, and but yeah, thanks.
Great, thank you. So, any other comments? Have a roll call vote?
Irma Archuleta.
Aye.
Virginia Baxter.
Aye.
Jeff Kellogg. Doug Otto.
Aye.
Sunny Zia.
Aye.
Carries unanimously. Moving on to 6.1, this is a resolution for the establishment of a bank account to process credit card receipt transactions. In a nutshell, what happened was that Comerica Bank, we're currently using that bank for purposes of processing our credit card receipt transactions. They have notified us that they will no longer insure our deposits beyond the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation limit, and therefore are revoking their collateralization records. So we're going to go to Farmers and Merchants Bank because they will insure these monies above the limit set by the FDIC. Is that a fair summary of what's going on? So we have to take an action to do this. I would entertain a motion.
So moved.
Moved by Trustee Baxter, seconded by Trustee Archuleta. Discussion. Roll call vote.
Irma Archuleta.
Aye.
Virginia Baxter.
Aye.
Jeff Kellogg.
Aye.
Doug Otto?
Aye.
Sunny Zia?
Aye.
Carries unanimously. We're on to 6.2, which is a resolution authorizing a request for waiver of Education Code Section 81360 in relation to the sale of Los Coyotes Diagonal and Palo Verde property. In essence, what this is that in order to, we have to go to the Board of Governors to be able to sell this property as broadly as possible. And we elected to do that earlier. We've got to pass a resolution to do that and to be in compliance with the Education Code. And this is also an action item. I would entertain a motion.
So moved.
Moved by Trustee Archuleta,
Second.
seconded by Trustee Baxter. Discussion. Hearing, Jeff?
Just to clarify, because when you read that on this resolution, and so the question that, and I'll let Vice President Gable, this property, it is not an escrow, it's not ready to close, it's not being sold at this time, just for clarification, correct?
Correct. The reason that we're doing this item is that we have previously gone out to bid twice on the property to try to sell it. The first time, the bid was not successful. The second time, we were successful in getting a bidder. We entered into escrow about 7 months into escrow. The purchaser decided to pull out of escrow. So that's what recently happened that has triggered this resolution. So what it will allow us to do is to petition the Board of Governors for them to allow us to waive having to follow the same formal bidding process that we've done the last 2 times, now unsuccessfully, and we'll be able to negotiate directly with any bidder that may be interested. So, we will still be reaching out and trying to get as broad amount of interest as possible, but we will be able to negotiate directly with a potential purchaser if the Board of Governors approves this waiver that we submit to them, assuming that you approve this resolution tonight.
Good. Other questions? Roll call vote, please.
Irma Archuleta?
Aye.
Virginia Baxter?
Aye.
Jeff Kellogg?
Aye.
Doug Otto?
Aye.
And Sunny Zia?
Aye.
Okay. Carries unanimously. Moving on to 6.3, the revised board policy 6010 on budget preparation. Could we have a presentation on this, please?
This is just a first reading.
This is a first reading, so we'll be happy to answer questions.
Okay. So this is the first reading. We'll vote on it at the April meeting?
Right.
Okay, good. Does anyone have any questions?
I do.
Otherwise, we'll, when it's an action item at the next meeting, we can discuss it further. Any questions?
President Otto, I do have questions on this one. So if you can please give me some context, our staff, why are these changes being recommended? Has there been an update? Are we not in compliance? Because the way it reads, it says to ensure compliance with current education and legal codes. Is it currently not? I doubt that's the case, but if you could just help me understand. And then I have some other questions that I submitted earlier, and I'm going to reiterate here. So if you can start with that, and then I'll ask my other questions.
I'll let Vice President Gable give you that background.
Right. So we are currently in compliance. What we're doing is GASB 54 went into effect in fiscal year 2010, 2011. Since that time, we have been putting these definitions in the agenda item each time we bring the budget to the board for approval. So both the tentative budget and the adopted budget, we've been spelling out what the definitions are in accordance with GASB 54. We felt that it would be more transparent if we put these into our board policy and have the board act on them, have it placed in policy, and just showing that we are complying with GASB statement number 54.
Okay, and what is that update of GASB 54? that they've had? I mean, what are we trying to comply with?
So the changes in GASB 54 is really redefining the definitions of the different components of your fund balance. So they have 4 different types of fund balance that your fund balance can be classified into. There's restricted, which means that those funds can't be spent unless it's for the purpose as specified in the law. There's committed fund balances, so those can only be committed if the board takes formal action on those items. And so with this board policy, what we are recommending is that the board designate the fund balance in our capital projects fund, our retiree benefits fund, our self-insurance fund, and our veterans stadium fund to be committed solely for those purposes of which the funds were established. Then we have assigned fund balances, which are things for specific purposes. So, for example, in the past with our budget, what the board has assigned are items, like I said, aside for the growth revenue, because we don't want to spend growth revenue until it's been earned. So it's kind of a year's delay in the growth revenue. So that's an example of assigned of what we've put there in the past. Another example is our vacation and load banking liabilities. We've assigned a portion of the fund balance to cover those liabilities to pay off the employees for the vacation and load banking that they've earned. And then there's the unassigned amount, which in the past has also been called the undesignated amount. And so that's really, the intent of GASB to do it was to clarify and make it simpler and more easily understood on the different types of fund balances.
And then as far as reporting on actuals, I noticed in our respective administrative regulation to the policy, it seems, maybe I'm missing it, it seems that it's silent on reporting actuals. Is there no requirement in this latest update to report actuals, or are we not going to speak to that in our policy and regulation? And then as far as the committed goes, are those estimated, and how is that going to be tracked versus actuals for the committed funds?
So this particular policy is related to budget preparation, so that's why we don't address the actuals. However, if you recall, when we present our budget book, we show, the adopted budget, the previous year's adopted budget, the current budget, our actuals, and then what we're proposing the new budget to look like. So each time you get a budget book, it will have the actual fund balance in there, and they will follow the same guidelines and the same classifications as required by GASB 54. When we do the budget, those are the estimates. When we close the books and present to you our year-end financial statements, those are the actuals, and they'll follow the same classifications.
So are we going to have estimated committed funds and actual committed funds, or is it just going to be committed funds, a broad committed funds?
For those 4 fund balances, they will be committed. All of them will be committed unless there are restrictions placed on some of those funds. So, for example, capital projects funds, if and when we ever get state funding again to help match all of our capital facilities needs, then if there's a balance in the amount of revenue and we haven't spent it all yet, that would be restricted because the state has stipulated that we can only spend that money for a very specific purpose. However, for all the other funds, those balances would be committed.
And if we don't use them, what happens?
Well, they're for very specific purposes. So the only way to uncommit them, the board would have to take action to uncommit them.
So the unrestricted general funds that are cannot be committed is am I misunderstanding?
Right. There isn't anything within the unrestricted general fund that we're proposing to be committed at this point in time.
Okay, where is that memorialized in this policy or administrative regulation that you're proposing to modify?
it's not spelled out. So if you look there on the page, you see kind of at the top of the screen, it says committed. And then under, BI, we're saying that the Board of Trustees designates the fund balance in the Capital Projects Fund, Retiree Benefits Fund, Self-Insurance Fund, and Veterans Stadium Fund as committed solely for the purposes established for each fund. So by the absence of the unrestricted general fund being listed there, it would not be shown as committed.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have.
And also, just to clarify, this is the practice that's been going on. The only difference is that instead of being in the policy, it comes to you every time we present a budget. So that same language is in the budget when we present it to you. Rather than present it every time, we thought it'd be better and more transparent to just list it in the board policy.
Well, I would certainly appreciate the increasing our efforts to be more transparent. I've just never seen committed funds in our budget, so this was the first time, and I'm looking forward to learning more about how we're going to codify that, and I appreciate the update.
Okay, moving on to 7.1, the accreditation update.
Yes, thank you, Board President Otto. As the board recalls, when we had our accreditation reaffirmed, the commission did request that we submit a follow-up report. We've been working on that, and I wanted to ask Dr. Bagg to come here today to give a brief update on the report, which was submitted recently.
Thank you, President Oakley, Board President Otto, trustees. Yes, so as President Oakley mentioned, we were required to submit a follow-up report based on the external evaluation team. You will all recall, because you each participated in that event, October 2014. And there were 2 recommendations. And just as a reminder, I think it's helpful to hear the exact language that came from the evaluation team and that was basically endorsed by the accrediting commission. So the first recommendation, the team recommended that the college address communication problems and increase transparency and trust through timely input process in decision-making and better integration of plans with improvement priorities, hiring, and resource allocation. So really, from the time that we heard, even before we got the letter from the commission in February, we were working to address these issues. So our Senate President, Karen Kane, co-chairing the College Planning Committee with our college president, really started looking at all of these issues. So we worked on the input process, really building into the timeline for the process of moving department plans, the school level plans, to the vice president of the 5 major divisions of the college, making sure that we provided clear opportunities for faculty and staff to participate into the input processes. We also spent a lot of effort in trying to make it more transparent at each of the levels what the prioritizations were. So for example, for this year's planning process, it was last week that we were to the point where each of the vice presidents' resource prioritizations and goals and priorities for the upcoming fiscal year were presented to not only the College Planning Committee, but we have, as part of our improvement efforts, joined that meeting with the Budget Advisory Committee to make all of that more transparent. And that will result in an institutional priority, which will then guide the ultimate resource allocations that happen for the 16-17 year. The other aspect that the visiting team wanted us to improve on was the ultimate decision-making. You know, in the end, what actually were the resource allocations, and we made efforts to do that more broadly. President Oakley kind of sent a summary of what we had decided upon in the previous year's plan and put out an email to the college community in November highlighting those. And the plan is to continue doing that. And we conducted an evaluation in 2 forms about how this process may or may not have improved. We talked about it in really the department planning subcommittee that's chaired by a faculty member, Karen Kane chairs that. We talked about it in the college planning committee, so we got qualitative input. And we also re-administered a survey that we have done throughout the implementation and refinement of our planning process. We did it in 2010, right after we first implemented, in 2012, and then again last fall. And we did see improvements based on faculty and staff input with regard to communication, people knowing more about the ultimate disposition of the resource prioritizations that had occurred. So always room for improvement, but we felt like we were able to provide lots of evidence in this report with regard to that recommendation. The second recommendation, again, the team had recommended the college systematically utilize student learning outcome assessment results to improve the achievement of stated student learning outcomes and to inform integrated planning decisions, including resource allocation and improvements across the college. So again, I want to commend the faculty leadership. We were transitioning with student learning outcomes coordinators during the time that we got this recommendation. So we were able to identify 2 new coordinators and had great leadership from the curriculum chair to integrate student learning outcomes with curriculum decisions as well as with planning and program review. And we were also able to solicit input from the faculty to identify many cases where there were resource allocations, significant purchases to equip labs for brand new classes that hadn't been documented prior to the visit and the team had not seen. And we were also able to capture that faculty are doing lots of things, hundreds of documented pedagogical changes based on student learning outcomes assessments. So again, we were able to document quite a bit with regard to that recommendation as well. So the report, it's 30 pages, it's in the board docs, and it's been sent off. So the commission will look at the report in June, and we should get a response probably in August, something.
Trustee comments?
I have a question. So thank you, Ava. This was great. It was very descriptive and honest. I really appreciated that. I believe it's page 13 and 14, where it's a summary of the survey that we had. So the big picture question I have is that, and perhaps it's here and I'm missing it, or you spoke to it and I may have missed it. Do we have, are these time bound as far as our resolutions go? Do we have any mechanism to assess the impact of the plans we're putting forward? Or is it just a matter of broadcasting the plan and hoping that it'll end up having an impact? Do we have those kind of milestones codified?
Right. So really, at every level, the college has really made great strides, I would say, in building metrics, measurable objectives for the goals. So, the departments have those built into program review. They look at data that's supplied on an annual basis. We look at 3-year trends, and faculty are able to make the kinds of decisions about where they want to focus their energies and build that into their plans. It happens at the school level, the vice president level plans, and President Oakley talked about our strategic plan. There will be goals, and each of those will have measurable objectives that we monitor those. And I would say for programs, the college has established a 3-year cycle. For the strategic plan, it will be in place for 6 years, but the college planning committee looks annually to see what our progress is against those. So I hope that's addressing your question.
Well, yes, and yet I'm trying to understand. So I'm looking at page 14. This is an excerpt from the survey, and it says that it was expressed that it still seems to take too long between the writing of the department plan in October and resources requested granted in April through October of the following year. So I want to understand how on real time that's being addressed. I understand the plans, and perhaps this is the engineer and implementer part of me that I get a little bit frustrated with plans and strategizing and analytics without impact and
Right.
outcome. And I'm sure we have that if we can just, if you can help me understand, there's other ways before the year timeline that you mentioned. How are we monitoring it, not necessarily in a real time, but how are we monitoring it to make sure we meet those outcomes?
Right, again, I mean, I think that those, the outcomes that are tied to the goals and the resources are typically designed in order for faculty and staff to achieve their goals. So with the departments, it's through the program review process, and faculty look at the results, whether it's student learning outcomes. Actually, that is a big part of the program review. They look at course success rates and the achievement of certificates and degrees, and, self-assess. It's sort of a replication of the accreditation process. And we do the same at the institution level. I think the survey responses talking about the delay that people
Right.
experience, so the things that we've done to address that, I would say it to some extent it depends on the type of resource. So for example, the departments will request new faculty hires. So we have an established process that is chaired by the Senate President and the Vice President of Academic Affairs, where they take, with a committee, they look at all of those resources, and they have criteria that's very specific and refined and improved over time to identify the faculty that are prioritized. And that goes out quite early, and I know that that is communicated to the Academic Senate and to the department heads, and that was in December. So that process, we know what the decision is fairly early on. With other resources, there's the whole process of getting quotes and actually, filling out the requisitions, and that often takes a long time, and I think that's been part of the frustration. So that's why, in part, the communication at a very high level happened this November for the plans that were written last year, where President Oakley kind of highlighted. There was an emphasis on classified reinstatements, for example. That was a high-level priority, and there were lots of specific positions that were encompassed there. So we're trying to be able to address the delay by just making it clear at least what the prioritizations are. So what the VPs decided upon or prioritized, that was just communicated. At least that information is being shared where it hadn't been as transparent or as timely before. And so I hope that's kind of getting at it. Where we have an opportunity to communicate, we are.
Yeah, and I certainly appreciate that. I'm more interested in how we've improved since the accreditation report. I'm talking about what's the percentage of the efficiencies that we've gained, those kind of improvement metrics, so that we can say tangible and measurable outcomes that we can point to and say, look, this is from the timeline of last year, this is what the progress we've made, those type of metrics, if we have those available.
Well, and just to clarify, that would be a separate process from the accreditation response.
Right, yeah.
The
Just from-
accreditation response really focuses on, do we have the mechanisms to capture information, use that information in the decision-reaching process, and then matching that to the resource allocation. The other issues with regard to speed in the planning process, that's something that the College Planning Committee is always looking at and will continue to look at. And certainly, if my co-chair wishes to say anything about that, she's more than welcome to.
Sure. The planning process does start, well, actually now, a lot of our departments are working on their plans for next year, which would be for the 17-18 funded fiscal year. So it is difficult because they're working on plans now, they're due in October, and then we go to the school level plan and then the VP plan, and we wind up where we are right now. But In the Department Plan Program Review Committee, through the last couple of years, working with Eva and Maria and now Jennifer Holmgren, we've polled our departments and said, how are you feeling about the process? Are you understanding the process? Is it transparent? And every year, we're getting a little bit more enthusiasm and also understanding. But this year, for the first time, we asked the group in November, how was the process? And some department heads are here today. And we both almost fell out of our chair because every single person in the room said, we understand it, we get it, and we know that the resources we're requesting now, for the most part, we'll find out in April through October of the following year. So in terms of measuring, it's not data, but it's certainly an indicator that the faculty are feeling better about the process and understanding it more, and we just have to keep talking about it and explaining it.
Okay, so perhaps you can help me understand, and why is it that the percentages don't, or perhaps I'm missing something. It says lower percentage of respondents felt that the process communicated information about the process and deadlines adequately and clearly, and it declined from 56% in 2012 to 40% in 2015. So how is it that they're feeling better about it when the percentages of the survey reflects otherwise?
Well, maybe Eva can explain this a little better than I, but here's how I would explain it. That survey is administered to every single faculty member, and we have a lot of new faculty who have never been involved in the process, so they would mark they didn't understand it. That would be one reason why. And then the other thing is, even though the departments are very involved in planning, if department faculty aren't engaging in that, then they would probably say, we don't understand. But so the group I'm referring to are the ones that are very, very involved in the planning, the department heads. And they're all feeling like the process is more transparent, understandable, and it's never going to be more efficient because it's a year-long process of pulling the entire college community together to meet timelines for the following year.
Okay, so what's the population that this 40% reflects? That it was a decline from 2012 in all aspects.
I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, but I think it was about 100 and some respondents, which isn't great. The timing was really compressed for the fall 2015 implementation, but even when we had more time in 2012, it wasn't that much higher, the people who actually responded. And I would say that we always see that those individuals who are department heads in particular, who are on a planning committee, always report more understanding, the experience of more transparency, and it's a function of their direct involvement. So we recognize that as an ongoing challenge, is to help people who aren't directly involved each time to at least understand what the high-level decisions are and how they relate to student learning and improvements, as you're pointing to.
So how many of these folks were, percentage-wise, new faculty, as our Academic Senate president was referring to? Do we have those numbers?
I do have it in the evidence. I do recall
Roughly.
that the distribution of respondents was really quite even across full-time faculty, a little bit less for part-time management and staff. So each of the constituent groups were represented about equally.
Right, well, I just want to understand if the majority were more veteran faculty versus new, so if the newer faculty are the anomaly.
No, we did not. We captured as much sort of background information of the respondents without getting how many years they've worked here.
I see, okay.
So I don't have that data.
Well, and if I could clarify, because I think we're getting off the point of the survey. The point of the survey, if you understand the planning process, it involves our department chairs who do the bulk of the planning in the departments. So there's two issues we're trying to tackle. One, to help those directly involved in planning improve not only the timeliness, but their understanding and involvement in planning. The second thing we're trying to accomplish is how that communication gets to the rest of the faculty and staff who are not participating in the planning process, which is the majority of faculty and staff because of the way we're organized. So I think perhaps you're not seeing concern on our face over the survey because we understand the faculty and the staff that we're surveying and the difference between the department chairs, the vice presidents, those who are on the committees versus the rest of the community. What we're trying to bridge the gap is the divide between those that are directly involved in the planning process and those that are not, to make sure that they understand how resource allocation is happening. So that's the challenge we're faced with. How do we better communicate? And that's the challenge that the accrediting commission site visitation team saw, that there is a gap between how people perceive and understand planning at the college versus those who are directly involved in it. And that's what we're trying to correct. So if a faculty member or a staff member is given the survey, what we're trying to get from it is, do they know enough about the planning process to respond? And if they're not responding, that tells us where we need to improve on disseminating information to them.